Pentagon quietly updated its war casualty database, recording more than 140 additional wounded and restoring the 4 soldiers killed due to the Iranian strikes after they effectively disappeared from the website.
When I was at the Pentagon, and we did unfortunately lose service members, we were very clear about where they were killed in action and the reason. And this idea that you're going to recategorize their deaths so it fits your political narrative that this war did not take a toll on 18 lives and over 600 wounded is gross. And it is, I think, deeply offensive to the families. I mean, people that I've spoken to at the Pentagon, this is not something that they have ever seen ever happen, a recategorization of how you would determine someone killed in action. And so, for the families of these 4 men and women who were just lost, it's devastating because when we have, the conversation of why they were lost because of this war. They were lost because Iran launched Iranian drones and ballistic missiles at installations where our service members are. And that is the reason.
It's the whole gimmick of saying, oh, okay, we've reached the threshold at which we don't have to notify Congress. So let's just pretend like we're going to start a new conflict. That, I think, seems to insult the intelligence of the American people who know exactly what's going on.
We've seen the Pentagon multiple times actually go through and set up after we've gone through several different kinds of border conflicts, after certain kinds of observations and then strikes, retaliations, recategorize both casualties on the injury side and then those who have died. We've seen this before, again, all the way dating back to the Korean and the Vietnam Wars, in which we've seen the Department of Defense at the time.
I've never seen Department of Defense recategorize injuries or deaths from an operation. I've never seen that. And I was at the Pentagon.
They've done so multiple times. Indeed, in the Obama administration, they recategorized the Syrian strikes multiple times.
That strikes, like deaths from a strike versus an entire operation is very different. This was an operation. This is a war. How do you explain how these 4 people died?
I'd like you to go back to asking very clearly, why didn't you know, if you're Miss Pentagon, why didn't you know the history of actually recategorizing strikes?
But hold on, how did these 4 people die?
Again, they were struck by Iranian forces.
From the war?
From, yes, the retaliation from the Iranians.
Okay, so it's from the war. Great.
Yeah, I mean,
that seems simple enough.
I don't even know why you would argue otherwise. Because it's the same conflict. It is definitely the same conflict. And I don't know. I mean, they initially tried to say this was a software glitch, and then they created a whole different place to put these names. Why?
I mean, look, what matters is that President Trump has honored these families, and I'm not shocked to hear that there's issues with government websites. Whether or not it was a purposeful obfuscation, I think remains to be seen.
But I think at this point we know that
they changed the classification.
What I would
we
say,
know that this is not. I mean, the names came down. They claimed it was an accident. That's some kind of glitch. But then they did not restore them to where they should be. They put them in a different place.
Right. So I'd like to see.
That's not a tech issue.
I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that restored. I think we need to have transparency around what's going on. I think one situation that, frankly, where we saw the government was certainly obfuscating, didn't have any transparency, was Anthony Fauci, who we're getting his diaries today, where he was purposely obfuscating about
Anthony Fauci.
That's actually something where we know he was purposely obfuscating.
Lydia, we're sitting here talking about Americans who were killed in theater, okay, as a result of a war. We are not going to pivot to Anthony Fauci's diaries. That's a different conversation.
You're saying that this is a purposeful obfuscation. We don't know that it was a purposeful obfuscation.
That we learned this weekend, Isaiah, the other thing we learned this weekend is that the president has been warned by his own Defense Department, by his own vice president, that we are running low on munitions stockpiles. I'm going to play, this is Mike Walls, the ambassador to the United Nations, who was asked about this. And just listen carefully to how he explains whether this is true or not.
Is America backing away from a larger military attack because its military stockpile has been depleted?
Well, look, we have to take a step back here in that a lot of stockpiles were depleted, not only from what we gave Ukraine over the last however many years, 4 or 5 years, and the administration inherited, the Secretary Hegseth inherited a depleted situation.
But you acknowledge
I want to be clear.
Do you acknowledge they're depleted, though, at this moment?
I want to be crystal clear. The U.S. military, and I've verified this every which way, has everything that it needs to conduct this campaign as effectively as it needs to be.
A tough job he's got there, because he seems to want to blame the previous administration for depletions and then claim that there are none.
I mean, it's just the standard playbook for them. It's just Biden derangement syndrome. It's really all they have at this point, because ultimately we understand that what was given to Ukraine was primarily for ground warfare. When it comes to this situation, I mean, he just said a couple weeks ago that the military had everything they needed to continue and to carry out these strikes. That's what he said. So it's amazing how when this comes down to where we are today, they change their tune. It's not really shocking, because this is what they do.
So you can't have it both ways. Are we depleted or aren't we depleted? I want your opinion on that.
The point is
no,
that Mike
answer
Waltz,
the
no,
question.
Mike
Answer.
Waltz
Do you
said
think we're depleted or not?
A couple weeks ago that we had everything we needed to carry out these strikes.
Can you answer the
question?
question?
So did he lie? Did he lie?
I'm asking you the question.
Did he lie?
What do you think?
It matters. I don't believe that the United States.
The reporting is that the president was warned by the Defense Department and by his own vice president that if they continued with a larger war campaign, which he has the option to do, that would dangerously deplete our munitions. So, and I've seen, actually, rather than a lot of people saying this is not true, I've seen a lot of conservatives saying, who leaked this? Which seems to imply that they believe it is true.
I do not believe that the United States is in a position right now where we're not able to continue interceptions. There's two kinds of core munitions. But if we're going to look at this right here, when you're looking at interception or positive action kinetic strikes.
That's just not the way you're characterizing it is not entirely accurate. I think there has been, I think the United States military, to your point, will do everything necessary to conduct an operation. But what you are not including here is that they will pull stocks from other combatant commands because our stockpiles are so depleted.
Why are our stockpiles depleted to this level? Do you think that a small operation like this was enough to deplete? You think this is enough to deplete the entire U.S. stockpile?
No. You just said interceptors. How long do those take to make?
That's an excellent question. How long do those take to make?
They take 2 years.
Yes, they do.
And do you know how many we've gone through in this war?
By all means. Do you have that data
go ahead.
point?
You tell me.
I'm asking you to give me the data
answer.
point.
What we have done is we have depleted very, very expensive munitions to shoot down very inexpensive drones, like $30,000 to $40,000 drones.
And to Walt's point, why did we not have a larger supply of interceptor missiles? If this isn't enough to take on Iran, then what about Russia or China?
We're not giving the type of interceptor missiles that we use on the battlefield to Ukraine. So you're saying those are different.
I mean, it sounds
so
like
then,
at this
do we
point,
have a ready stockpile to take on a larger group?
It sounds like at this point, Tony, you're acknowledging that there is a depletion happening.
I'm saying that either so. If there's a conditional.
Today, the Trump administration reintroduced a new rule to accelerate deportations with the goal of reducing what it's calling a backlog in the asylum system.
But that's all we've heard repeatedly throughout this administration is we are going to target the worst of the worst. The Democrats want to keep dangerous criminals in this country. But that all proves what we've all been saying. That's not true. They just want to make these target numbers that they've come up with. And if you think about this, about what they're doing with the Haitians and Syrians and others, we're going to send people who were here legally back to countries that are plagued with violence, that they are in extreme danger if they go back to these countries. And these folks are working and contributing to the economy. This has nothing really to do with keeping Americans safe or rooting out career criminals. It has to do with meeting some made-up mandates that the president has been put out there. And it all, I think, also relates to trying to distract from what happened in Minneapolis and what happened with those two murders. And there's real questions about whether those individuals were here legally or not, and whether they should have even been targeted. And the asylum process is one that has worked well in this country. It is not easy. I work with folks who are trying to get asylum. It is not an easy process. And to circumvent that undercuts kind of what is at the foundation of this country, that you can come here seeking freedom if you're in need of it.
Yeah, I mean, Ellie, the asylum issue has been a target of conservatives for a long time. They think that it's too easy to claim asylum. And maybe they are right to some extent, that the the asylum system is so broad and the adjudication is so slow that it does leave this massive backlog. But what they're doing now is basically putting all of those people before these immigration judges who are part of the Justice Department. And I think people might forget that months ago, the Trump administration, they purged a lot of immigration judges who they thought were too willing to grant asylum. So they're going toward a group of folks now who are very much aligned with the Trump administration's vision for cracking down on asylum.
There are many problems with the asylum system. They have existed for many years. However, what the Trump administration is now doing is really treading right on that line of no due process, because what they're doing now with this rule change is essentially saying of the 1.4 million or so pending asylum claims, we're going to take 440,000 of them who have been here for more than a year, and we're essentially going to take you out of the normal system, put you in front of a judge who can summarily dismiss your asylum case, and then you'll be gone. And the thing I want to point out is the decisions that the administration makes and the Supreme Court makes have immediate and vast consequences. And we're seeing that now in the asylum context. We're seeing that now with the temporary protected status decision as well. And to Christine's point, there is a fundamental, not just tension, but conflict between, on the one hand, we're going to deport the worst of the worst, and on the other hand, and here's a daily quota. You have to deport 2,000 people a day. Those two things do not mesh.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's an important point. I mean, when you have quotas, you're basically saying a dragnet is okay.
Well, look, I think the results speak for themselves. This is one of the areas where President Trump is doing strongest and Republicans are doing strongest is on crime. They have a 14-point advantage over the Democrats when it comes to cracking down on crime.
But we just discussed that we're not talking about criminals here.
Right. But this is all part of the concerted effort.
Who are
really those Haitians? There's no evidence
actually by any stretch of the imagination.
There's no evidence that there is a significant number, if any, of the Haitians who are here on TPS who are the worst of the worst or criminals. This isn't about crime.
There is plenty of evidence that there is crime related to all of this.
Really?
By the way, this is
Where's the evidence?
You know what's really interesting about this?
Where's the evidence?
You know what's so fascinating?
This is putting so much stress on our entire system, on
the
healthcare system, on the education. Well,
where's the evidence of the crime?
So you just switched from crime to healthcare to education.
He's all over. He's dream shaking.
No, but because it's all tied. You can't say that immigration does not impact all these other sectors.
All I'm saying is, where's the proof?
What I'm saying,
that's all I'm saying.
We just said that we're bringing in people from very violent countries. We have increased crime under the Biden administration during those 4 years, period. I don't think this is really up for debate.
It is very much up for debate.
Here's the reality here, because there's this thing in this world called facts. And the facts is that only 5% of the people that you're deporting are violent, convicted criminals. Those people that are the worst of the worst, violent rapists, gang members inside of our country. Everybody agrees that those people need to be deported. But you're only deporting 5% of violent, convicted criminals. Let's go compare that to when Barack Obama was in office. 92% of the people that were deported under interior removals were convicted criminals. And of that 92%, 81% were deemed by the federal government as the worst of the worst. So we went from deporting that many of violent people inside of our country to only 5%. You guys are not focused on the real violent threats that are inside of our country, and that's evident.
Yes, we absolutely are.
So,
do you understand 5%?
So as I mentioned,
5%?
Terry, as I
is 5% allowed? Which number is bigger?
It was not just about crime.
Hang on
a second. It was about education. It was about the healthcare system.
Terry,
it was about
now we're talking about education.
What we're talking about here, and as I pointed out, the group of immigrants that we're talking about here are highly vetted. Asylum seekers, TPS seekers, and in the case of what they're doing at airports, these are people who have pending immigration cases. According to the New York Times, they're going to these airports, and according to an immigration lawyer, they're casting a net for the people that they want to detain that is far wider. This lawyer has 4 clients who were detained at airports in the last 10 days, including 2 women who recently married Americans and are in the process of obtaining permanent residency through their spouse. One of the husbands was with his wife when he was taken into custody in Burbank, California. These are people who are basically waiting for the federal government to adjudicate their legitimate pathway to a green card and citizenship. And the Trump administration, because it's easy and frictionless, is just picking them up at airports. Again, how is this addressing the issue of crime or the worst of the worst?
Well, I think the issue, Abby, is the scope of the problem with Biden's open border policies. We did allow a lot of people that should not be here in an unprecedented scale to come into this country.
So why are
I'm a descendant of immigrants to this country. I believe that we are founded in this country on. I believe that people should be afforded. People are actually that are under TPS or asylum status. They are afforded certain elements of the Constitution and due process. I think that should take place. But what happens is when the pendulum swings in either direction, Abby, too far, the response is often commensurately too far, and I think that's what we're seeing.
So is that what you're?
Right now.
I mean, look, I'll
not a justification.
I'll take
it's an
your
observation.
acknowledgement that this is too far. Is that what you're saying?
I think in some instances it is, but I also don't think that we should just automatically assume that there will be a wholesale deportation of those 450,000 Haitian immigrants.
Well, what happens when you revoke their status? What do you think happens?
There would be a review.
But what was the reason for doing that?
If there's no interview, how's there a full review?
As I said, when you have a problem that is exacerbated by the open border policy.
What is that open border policy? Can you define what that means?
I can tell you that there were 3,000 murders committed by illegal aliens.
I'm asking you, what
talk to the families of Lake and Riley. Talk to the families of some of these people that should not be dead right now and are
Can you
because
define
of those
what that
policies.
means? What policy?
Letting people flow over the border.
How did they let? There was still immigration officers. What are you talking about?
They were instructed to allow those people to come into this country.
Define the policy, though. Are you saying that immigration officers weren't there along the southern border?
Dr. Fauci was relentlessly grilled by Republican senators as part of a years-long investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, its handling under the Trump and Biden administrations, and what Republicans allege is a cover-up.
Public service and public servants should be respected, everyone who was in that hearing and meeting room. But what's happened is this is an assault on science and scientists. And unfortunately, Dr. Fauci is in that seat. 38 years of service to the country, one of the best known scientists for infectious disease, unfortunately has taken a lot of heat for probably a lot of, shall we say, issues that were not fully his. He didn't make all the decisions that drove the COVID pandemic, but you are right that he is one of the most respected scientists and should be respected in that same sort of way. Today, we certainly didn't learn anything from the way the hearing was held.
So let me let Lydia respond, and then I want to...
Let's be super clear, though. Based on his policy recommendations, there were people removed from beaches at gunpoint. There were people who were trying to open a gym so people could work out outside. They were arrested. Children who weren't able to go to school. People who committed suicide because of the social isolation. And anytime that anybody dared to ask a question about herd immunity, COVID origins, the vaccine, are there other treatments? They were systematically silenced. They were deplatformed. In some cases, they were fired. Their lives were ruined. And at the same time, now these diaries have revealed Dr. Fauci was more concerned about being on Zooms with celebrities. He was more concerned about
Lydia,
in style than any of the he knew.
Let me ask you a question. Can you be a little bit more specific about what you think Fauci did and said that was so wrong, that based on what we knew at the time, that you should hold him accountable for every bad thing that happened during COVID as a result of the virus and lockdowns? So
the diaries are quite illuminating because he was writing one thing at the same time that he was saying something very different publicly. He was extremely dismissive, for instance, of the origins of COVID. At the same time that he was saying, I don't think this is from the wet market. That's just one example.
Okay.
Well, he went further than that, right? He adamantly said that this whole idea that we would even talk about a lab leak theory is wrong and suppressing those opinions.
So hold on a second. July 20th, 2021, he's testifying in a Senate hearing. He says, my own view, based on the studies I've reviewed, is that most likely COVID infections were a result from zoonotic transmission. However, as I have publicly stated, the possibility of a laboratory accident exists. A laboratory accident could include scenarios where a naturally occurring virus was unintentionally released during research activities, such as the collection of animal samples or examination of virus in a laboratory. I am in full favor of investigation into the origins of COVID-19. So the idea that he completely dismissed the lab leak theory, which he did not, seems to be disproven by testimony that he made within a year of the pandemic. Secondly, you're talking about the lab leak theory as if that is proven, which it is not.
No,
So-
it is widely believed that is what happened here. And if you go back, it is widely believed. And if you were to go
Dr.
back-
Ratson, tell us what is widely believed.
Well, I think the reality is we shouldn't be worrying about the lab leak theory today. What we should be thinking about is how we build a healthier America. That's what this Homeland Security Group was about. How do we prepare? How do we have a proactive plan and be able to avoid some of the problems that happened in the past?
Well,
Dr. Fauci was
you're
making
now
policy
saying that we shouldn't
recommendations.
talk about where COVID came from. At least looking forward to see how we can prevent something like this from happening again.
I also think your assertion that the lab leak is widely believed, and I take from that widely believed by scientists and doctors, is not true.
This was intentional today to be about political theater. Let's just put that on the table,
Yes.
number one. Number two, I think people forget, one, Donald Trump was the president, and while Fauci was trying to save us, Trump was trying to grave us, telling people to drink bleach. And
So that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And I know that that's a talking point that people like to intentionally take out of context.
Are you telling
It
me
didn't
the-
happen.
are you telling me the
Yes, I'm
president
telling
did
you the
not-
president did not tell you to
Well, we
drink
have tape to prove
bleach. I'm
otherwise.
telling you with a matter of fact, and everyone knows that the president didn't tell you to drink bleach.
I'm telling you otherwise. Number, as
Then you're wrong. You're wrong on that. I'm sorry, you're wrong on that.
Let me finish one point. As an African American sitting at this table, when America had a cough during that COVID-19 pandemic, Black America had the flu. We were dying at clips that no other constituency, another race were dying. So we took this pandemic very serious, and
Everyone took it
we need to
seriously.
be in a position to where when things like this happen, that we don't press the ignore button and act.
Agreed, but and that's why you should
In
be
other
upset
words,
with
in other words, we
Anthony
need to
Fauci on
believe
this.
science when it comes to having a vaccine.
I think Fauci saying one thing.
Science does not need to plead the fifth 111 times. It does not need
You know
a
what?
ton of
When the
adrenaline. Why can't he answer the question?
chair of the hearing, the senator has said repeatedly that he wants to put you behind bars. It is a prudent thing
Is that
to do
out of nowhere?
to take
You
the
can
fifth.
choose not
That
to
is a
commit a
prudent
crime.
decision.
Hold on one second.
I don't know about
Lydia,
like, did you
man
fund gain of
has
function
an
research?
agenda. The man
Lydia,
has
just
an
a second.
agenda.
Just a second. I just want to make it clear. Let's not pretend that Anthony Fauci has not testified before Congress on these issues before. He has testified to gain of function research. He has testified to all of the issues that we're talking about here today. He has testified under oath repeatedly over the last 6 years to a lot of those issues.
He got a pardon.
But hold on. Okay.
He was preemptively pardoned, and I think because the pardon wouldn't have extended to today.
What does a pardon have to do with the fact that he testified under
Here's
oath
why.
Before the
to
pardon.
all
Because
of these
before the
issues?
pardon.
So the idea that he has not answered questions is not true. But
Abby,
I do
but
want to just a second, Jason. I want to get to a really important thing because the American people are grappling with to what degree science can be trusted, right? And I think this is a difficult topic because there were things that were said early in the pandemic, which, by the way, I guess I may need to remind some people, when Donald Trump was president and shut the country down, that were decisions that were made based on what they thought they knew at the time, right? Some of those things actually did turn out to be wrong. Schools were closed for too long. There were a lot of things, perhaps, that went on for too long. What is the responsibility of the scientific community in a circumstance like that?
Well, that's a really important question, Abby. Science is incremental, and scientists are not always the best scientific communicators. So really what we need to do, what we had in the past, was a strong institutions that were able to communicate, whether it be the CDC, Health and Human Services, others that were leaders. We once had a Surgeon General that actually was followed. C. Everett Koop during the AIDS pandemic, while Anthony Fauci was head of NIAID. There have been times when we have had a very significant response. The American Response to AIDS campaign did very well, both with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Koop at the time. We don't have that today. We need a trusted, coordinated source.
The president is apparently so unwilling to pull back from his tax immunity deal that he and his family stand to benefit from, and he refuses to give up this $1 billion anti-weaponization fund for his allies, that now he's threatening to put his handpicked nominee for attorney general on ice. Republican senators John Cornyn and Thom Tillis have signaled for days they're not going to support Todd Blanche unless the administration kills Trump's fund for good.
If I was looking at the polling landscape right now and the Senate math, I wouldn't be overly confident that you're going to get more Republicans in the Senate or even hold the majority. It's very much up in the air. What Todd Blanche had said that he would do orally is shelve the weaponization fund, even, which is not sufficient for senators. They want it in writing. Even in that in those comments, he refused to back away from the tax, liability pledge and the sweeping immunity for the Trump family. And that does seem to be what the president wants, because if he was to put it in writing, it would actually kill the weaponization fund. It's oral pledges from the acting AG don't matter. If the president's attorneys sign on to what is essentially the end of this settlement, that's it. That's done. Yeah. So they're not going to go that far.
That's exactly what he doesn't want. And to your point, I mean, the tax audit part of this doesn't get as much attention, but that's the part that actually Blanche didn't really get into the details of whether that was or was not going to happen. But it sounds like in the private conversations, he said, you know, we'll be willing to do away with it. But let me just play. I think we have what Cassidy said happened last night when they thought that they were making some progress, and then something changed.
Todd Blanche cannot give commitments that Cornyn and Tillis want. And by the way, I'm very concerned about the weaponization of the Justice Department.
If the vote happened today, would you support him?
I'm not going to answer that because I'm still in the information gathering stage.
I thought we were pretty close to landing the plane last night, but this morning there's been some more complications. I think if this were just between me and Todd Blanche, we would have worked this out, but apparently he's getting some pushback from higher-ups at the White House. We made a counter proposal, and we thought we basically had met in the middle, but heard this morning that that was all off.
It's the president. It's the president who does not want to move forward with this.
I mean, it's the president doing what he does often, which is prioritizing Donald Trump. I don't think there's anybody who's seen this president act in a way over the past 10 years since he came down that golden escalator at Trump Tower, who's done anything in an interest that was other than himself and his family. This should be a simple look. The American public doesn't want this weaponization bill. A very small percentage. Other than the people who were actually indicted, charged, convicted of rioting, insurrection, all those other things, outside of the people who were in the Trump orbit, nobody wants this. I mean, it's a giveaway to people who assaulted police officers, point blank, period. There's no excuse. There's nothing you can do to circumvent that. Now, on the IRS settlement, the reason that Todd Blanche can't really work around it is he's the one who drafted the settlement. He's the one who signed off on these different elements that are going into it. So backing off that is very difficult for him. And the president himself knows that, you know, going forward, there will be accountability. There will be accountability for Donald Trump, his children, and the people who have been profiteering off their service in the White House. You can guarantee that.
Well, to be clear, Trump and the family right now, at least as it relates to the IRS, they're the victims. They were the victims here. They illegally released their tax documents. And I understand why the president comes from the position, or his family's coming from the position, that they want to make sure that they can do everything that they can that legally they can get away with. In the future, they're not going to be subject to another IRS or a rogue, agent within the IRS who will go ahead and target them again. I understand that position. That is separate, I think, from the weaponization fund, which I generally agree with you. It's not a Jan 6 weaponization fund, but it is written in a way that was too broad. And I do think that was a mistake from this White House. But also, keep in mind, you've got two senators here who are holding this entire thing hostage while also acknowledging they don't have a problem with Todd Blanche, that this is not Blanche holding anything up. And yet they're the ones who are holding him up to become the next attorney general.
Yeah, but the other issue, the president is petty. So this is kind of like the state of what politics are, and especially in the Republican Party. So for them to try to, or for any Republican to criticize this, or anybody, period, as retaliation, well, we see a lot of that in our American political structure. The other part I'll say about this that is utterly kind of disturbing on a macro level is that to a lot of people, much like you said, Bakari, this weaponization fund is a slap in the face to a lot of people, especially to those who serve and protect us. Then you have, in general, just the blatant corruption of Donald Trump and his entire family. And you could say that this is to protect him in case somebody decides somewhere down the line, we're going to go after Donald Trump because of some level of personal retaliation. But we know it's not about that. It's about.
What was it about to release illegally his
Listen,
tax
I'm not disagreeing that wasn't illegal. I'm not saying that should have.
I'm just saying he's the victim.
But if you're thinking that this is just about
become a victim again,
him wanting to protect himself from further things, it's not. It's protecting himself from the blatant corruption that he actively involves himself in, him and his family, all the time.